Hey everyone, quick thing before we dive in. I was looking at my analytics and it turns out most of the people watching aren't actually subscribed. See this? Way more views than subscribers. If you're enjoying the videos and want to see more, hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and you'll never miss new uploads. Alright, let's get into it.
I've always been a creature of habit, and my evening walks through Carver Estates were no exception. Every night at 8:47 p.m., I would slip on my Nike running shoes, grab my keys and phone, and step out of my modest two-story colonial into the perfectly manicured suburban paradise I'd called home for 3 years. The gated community was everything the brochures had promised when Mark and I first toured it. Tree-lined streets, matching mailboxes, sidewalks wide enough for strollers and joggers to coexist peacefully. The HOA fees were steep, but the peace of mind was worth it. Or so we'd thought before the divorce papers were filed last spring. Now, living alone in a house designed for a family, I found myself clinging to routines like life preservers. The evening walk was my favorite. 32 minutes of brisk movement through the neighborhood's central loop, ending precisely at my front door. I had timed it obsessively with my Fitbit, knew every crack in the sidewalk, every house where the porch light stayed on past 9. Tonight felt different from the moment I stepped outside. The October air carried an unusual chill, despite the weather app showing a comfortable 68 degrees. I pulled my zip-up hoodie tighter and started down my driveway, noting automatically that the Hendersons had finally replaced their garage door sensor. The light came on smoothly as I passed. Petunia Lane stretched ahead of me, bathed in the warm glow of decorator street lamps that the HOA had installed last year. During the day, I could see from one end of the street to the other, a gentle curve that connected the main entrance to the community center and playground area. Maybe a quarter-mile total. I started my usual pace, muscle memory guiding my feet along the familiar path. The Johnsons' house on my right, with its aggressive Halloween display already up, despite being only the first week of October. The Martinez family's place, with their Tesla always plugged in, the charging port glowing blue in the darkness. I pulled out my phone to check my step counter, a habit that had become almost compulsive since Mark left. The screen showed 8:51 p.m. and 342 steps, right on schedule. The first sign something was off came at what should have been the halfway point. I had walked this route hundreds of times. I knew that after passing the 7th house on my left, the Patel's place with their immaculate rose garden, I would reach the gentle bend that led to the community center. But as I approached where the curve should begin, the street simply continued straight ahead. I stopped, frowning. The Patel house was right there, roses still blooming despite the season, but instead of the familiar curve, Petunia Lane extended into darkness beyond the reach of the street lamps. Maybe I'd been distracted, thinking about tomorrow's quarterly review at the marketing firm. Maybe exhaustion was making me paranoid. I resumed walking, determined to complete my routine. The Fitbit on my wrist showed I'd only covered half my usual distance. I needed the exercise, needed the endorphins that came with finishing what I'd started. The next house I passed was identical to the Martinez place. Same architectural style, same landscaping, even the same blue glow from an electric car charger in the driveway. But this couldn't be the Martinez house because I'd already passed that at the beginning of my walk. I slowed, studying the property more carefully. The house number, barely visible in the decorative lighting, read 1247. The Martinez house was 1247 Petunia Lane. My mouth felt dry. I stopped in front of the mailbox, reading the name printed in neat vinyl letters. Martinez. This was impossible. I pulled out my phone again, opening the camera app and turning on the flash. The sudden bright light revealed the front of the house in stark detail. The same cream-colored siding, the same red front door, the same ceramic planters flanking the entrance. Even the Tesla in the driveway appeared to be the same model, same color. But I'd already passed the Martinez house. I was certain of it. My hands were shaking slightly as I continued walking, each step now deliberate and measured. The street continued ahead, lined with houses that were becoming increasingly familiar. There was the Johnson's place again, Halloween decorations garish in the darkness. The plastic skeleton in the front yard seemed to be grinning more widely than before, though that had to be a trick of the lighting. My step counter showed I'd walked nearly 3/4 of a mile, more than twice the normal length of Petunia Lane. My heart was beating faster, and not from the exercise. I passed my own house. There was no mistaking it, the blue-gray colonial with the slightly overgrown front hedge that I kept meaning to trim, the brass numbers 3608 reflecting the streetlight, my own silver Camry in the driveway. Even the porch light was on, just as I'd left it. But my house should be at the beginning of the loop, not wherever I was now. I stopped on the sidewalk in front of my own home, staring up at the darkened windows. I could see the faint blue glow of the TV I'd left on in the living room, tuned to the local news channel I used for background noise. Something was wrong with the light, though. It flickered in a pattern that didn't match any TV program I knew. 3 quick flashes, pause, 3 quick flashes, pause, like a signal. My phone buzzed with a text notification. I glanced down automatically. "You have been outside for 47 minutes. Your usual walk is 32 minutes. Is everything okay?" The message was from myself, or rather, from the home security app I'd installed after the divorce. It tracked my phone's location and sent automated check-ins when my patterns deviated. 47 minutes? That was impossible. I'd only been walking for... I checked the time display. 9:34 p.m. Somehow, I'd lost merely an hour. I looked up at my house again, then pulled my keys from my pocket. The smart thing to do would be to go inside, make some tea, maybe call my sister in California, chalk this up to stress and poor sleep and the general upheaval of rebuilding my life from scratch. But as I approached the front door, I noticed the smell. It was subtle at first, just a hint of something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water. But as I got closer to the porch, it grew stronger, sickeningly sweet. The smell of decay masked by perfume. The house looked exactly right, but it smelled wrong. Everything about it was perfect, except for that underlying rot. And somehow that made it more terrifying than if it had been obviously different. I backed away from the door, my breath coming faster. Whatever was in there, I couldn't face it. I turned and started walking again, faster now. Behind me, the TV light in my house shifted from the strange flickering pattern to something that looked almost like movement. Shadows passing back and forth behind the curtains, as if someone inside was pacing. The houses continued to repeat in patterns I was beginning to recognize. Johnson, Martinez, Patel, Henderson. Johnson, Martinez, Patel, Henderson. Each one perfect in its details, down to the specific plants in the gardens and the particular models of cars in the driveways. My Fitbit showed I'd walked over 2 miles now. The longest straight residential street in the city was barely a mile long. Petunia Lane was a fraction of that. I forced myself to stop, to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I was sleepwalking, or having some kind of medical episode. Maybe the stress of the divorce and work had finally pushed me over some invisible edge into a breakdown. I sat down on the curb in front of what appeared to be another copy of the Henderson house and called my sister Jenny. "Sarah, it's almost 11 there, isn't it? Are you okay?" The sound of Jenny's voice, familiar and concerned and completely normal, was like an anchor in the surreal evening. I felt tears of relief spring to my eyes. "Jenny, I think I think something's wrong with me. I'm on my walk, but the street isn't ending. I keep passing the same houses over and over, and I've been walking for hours, but... Whoa, slow down. Where are you exactly? I'm on Petunia Lane, in my neighborhood. But it's not longer than it should be. I passed my own house, but I started from my own house. And there was this smell. What kind of smell? Like something rotting, but sweet. And the TV was flickering in this weird pattern like someone was trying to signal. I realized how I sounded. Crazy. Delusional. Okay, listen, Jenny's voice was calm, professional. She'd been a nurse for 15 years and had dealt with confused patients before. I want you to open your Maps app and tell me exactly what it shows for your location.
I fumbled with my phone, hands shaking. The GPS showed me as a blue dot on Petunia Lane, but the street on the map extended far beyond the boundaries I knew were correct. According to the phone, Petunia Lane was nearly 5 miles long. It shows the street going on for miles, Jenny, but that's not right. My street is tiny. I could walk end to end in 5 minutes. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Jenny spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. Sarah, I want you to call 911 and ask for an ambulance. I think you might be having some kind of medical emergency. I'm not crazy, I said quickly, though part of me wondered if that was true. I didn't say you were crazy, but sometimes when people are under extreme stress, or if there are blood sugar issues, or even dehydration, it can cause confusion and disorientation. There's no shame in getting checked out. I looked around at the houses lining the street, each one perfect and identical to memories I was certain were real. As I watched, the Halloween decorations at the Johnson house began to move slightly, not from any wind I could feel, but as if someone was tugging invisible strings. What if I'm not sick? I asked quietly. What if something is actually wrong here? Jenny was quiet for a long moment. Then we'll figure that out too. But first, let's make sure you're safe. Can you see any address numbers? I stood up and walked to the nearest mailbox. 1247, I read. Okay, stay right there. I'm going to call the police in your area and have them send someone to check on you. Don't keep walking, Sarah, just stay put. But what if... The call cut off. I looked at my phone screen. No service. The bars that had shown full signal moments before were completely empty. I tried calling back, but the phone couldn't find a network. The GPS was still working, still showing my location, but everything else requiring a connection had gone dark. Behind me, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Footsteps on the sidewalk, moving at the exact same pace I'd been walking. I turned around slowly. A figure was approaching from the direction I'd come, maybe 100 yards away. Even in the dim light between street lamps, I could see it was a woman in dark clothing, walking with a familiar stride. It was me. The other me walked with purpose, her head up, moving at the exact pace I always used for my evening walks. She wasn't looking around or showing any signs of confusion. She walked like someone who knew exactly where she was going. I started walking away from her, trying to keep calm. Maybe if I just continued my route, whatever this was would resolve itself. Maybe the street would end, or I'd find the security gate, or... Behind me, the footsteps matched my pace exactly. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. But they never got closer and they never fell behind. They maintained that precise distance, like an echo. I broke into a jog, then a run. The footsteps behind me shifted to match, but still maintained that precise distance. It was like being chased by my own shadow, if shadows could make sounds on concrete. The houses blurred past in my peripheral vision as I ran, the same familiar facades repeating in their impossible pattern. Johnson, Martinez, Patel, Henderson. Johnson, Martinez, Patel, Henderson. Each perfect in its details, each exactly as I remembered, but wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. I ran for what felt like miles, until my lungs burned and my legs began to wobble. Finally, I had to stop, gasping for air and clutching a street lamp for support. The footsteps had stopped too. I turned around expecting to see the other me standing there, but the street behind me was empty. The pools of light from the street lamp stretched back into the distance, showing nothing but empty sidewalk and perfectly maintained lawns. But I could feel eyes watching me. The sensation was so strong it made my skin crawl, that prickly awareness of being observed that every human recognizes instinctively. I scanned the houses around me, looking for movement in windows, for any sign of where the watcher might be hiding. That's when I noticed the Henderson house beside me. The windows were dark, but in the upstairs bedroom, I could see a silhouette. It was standing perfectly still, and even though I couldn't make out features, I knew it was looking at me. As I stared up at the figure, another silhouette appeared in the Martinez house, across the street, then another in the Johnson house. One by one, dark figures filled the windows of every house on the block, all standing motionless, all facing my direction.
My phone buzzed with a notification. The home security app again. You have been outside for 97 minutes. Unusual activity detected. Multiple motion sensors triggered. Would you like to contact emergency services? Multiple motion sensors. The app was detecting movement in my house while I was standing on the street, being watched by impossible figures in windows. I tried once more to call Jenny, but the phone still showed no service. On impulse, I opened my camera and started recording a video. It's October 6th, and it's 10:23 p.m., I said, my voice shaking. I'm on Petunia Lane in my neighborhood, but something is wrong. The street is longer than it should be, and there's someone who looks like me following me, and now there are people in all the windows watching me. I turned the camera to show the street, the endless row of houses, and the phone's screen. I could see the silhouettes in the windows more clearly. They weren't people at all. They were too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. I don't know if anyone will see this, but if you do, and if something happens to me, I live at 3608 Petunia Lane in Petunia Estates. I went for my regular walk and I can't get out. I stopped recording and kept the video file open, evidence that what I was experiencing was real. The next house I approached was my own again. This was the fourth time I'd encountered 3608 Petunia Lane, and it looked different now. The porch light was flickering erratically, casting wild shadows across the front yard. All the lights in the house were on. Every window blazed with warm yellow light, but something was moving behind every single one. The sweet, rotten smell was stronger here, so powerful it made my eyes water. And underneath it, I caught another scent, something metallic and sharp, like copper pennies or blood. I could hear sounds coming from inside the house now, footsteps moving from room to room, the creak of floorboards, the distant sound of running water. Normal domestic sounds, except they were too loud, too deliberate, like someone was performing the act of living for an audience. My phone buzzed with notifications from the security app, one after another. Motion detected, living room. Motion detected, kitchen. Motion detected, master bedroom. Motion detected, basement. Motion detected, attic. But then came one that made my blood run cold. Motion detected, front door. I looked up to see the front door of my house opening. A woman stepped out onto the porch, and even though I'd been expecting it, seeing myself emerge from my own home was like a physical blow. She was perfect, every detail exact, from the slightly messy ponytail to the small scar on my left hand from a childhood accident. But her movements were wrong, too smooth, too deliberate, like someone had studied how I moved but was performing it rather than living it. The other me locked the door behind her with my own keys, then started down the driveway. But instead of heading in the opposite direction, she turned toward me. She began walking in my direction, and this time she was looking right at me. Even from a distance, I could see her expression. She was smiling, but it was all wrong. Too wide, too fixed, like someone had told her to smile and she'd forgotten how to stop. Her eyes never blinked as she approached. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't try to pace myself. I ran like my life depended on it because some primal part of my brain was screaming that it did. Behind me, I could hear footsteps, but they weren't matching my pace anymore. They were getting closer. The houses flew past in a blur of repeating facades, but now I could see figures in every window, those two tall silhouettes tracking my movement as I passed. Some of them had started to move, turning to follow my progress down the street. My lungs burned, my heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't dare stop. The footsteps behind me were definitely gaining ground now. I could hear breathing that wasn't quite right, like someone consciously trying to remember how to breathe. Ahead of me, the street lamps began to flicker and die, one by one. The darkness was rushing toward me like a wave, swallowing the familiar houses and leaving nothing but black void. I pushed myself harder, racing the approaching darkness, but I was tiring. My legs growing heavy, my pace slowing despite my desperate effort to maintain speed.
The last functioning street lamp was maybe 50 yards ahead when I felt something brush against my shoulder. I screamed and dove forward, rolling across the sidewalk and scrambling back to my feet. When I spun around, the other me was standing exactly where I'd been a moment before, still wearing that horrible, fixed smile. "You can stop running now," she said, and even her voice was wrong, too precise, like she was reading from a script. "You're home." "I'm not home," I gasped, backing toward the last circle of light. "This isn't real. This isn't my street." "It is now," she said, taking a step toward me. "It's been your street all along. You just needed to walk far enough to understand." The darkness reached us then, swallowing the last street lamp. In the sudden absence of light, I could hear movement all around me. Footsteps from multiple directions, the sound of doors opening, voices calling my name in perfect unison. I lunged desperately toward where I remembered the light had been, diving through the crushing darkness with my hands outstretched. And suddenly, I was rolling across wet grass, my hands scraping against concrete. Real concrete. Cold and rough and absolutely, wonderfully real. I gasped, pushing myself up to sitting. I was in my front yard, under the familiar glow of my porch light. My silver Camry sat in the driveway. The street looked exactly as it always had, short, curved, ending at the community center just like it was supposed to. My phone was buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands. 11:47 p.m. I had 17 missed calls from Jenny, dozens of text messages, and a voicemail from the local police saying they'd done a welfare check but couldn't locate me. According to my Fitbit, I'd somehow walked 8.3 miles. I sat there on my lawn for a long time, staring at Petunia Lane. It looked completely normal. The houses were dark except for porch lights. No figures in windows, no endless repetition. Just a regular suburban street where nothing impossible had ever happened. I tried to remember how I'd gotten back to my yard, but there was nothing. One moment I was surrounded by darkness and my own voice calling my name. The next I was home. Maybe I'd had some kind of breakdown. Maybe I'd been wandering around in circles for hours, confused and disoriented. Maybe none of it had been real. But my shoes were covered in dirt, and when I checked the video I'd recorded on my phone, the file was corrupted. Just static and the faint sound of footsteps. I went inside, double-locked the door,
and sat on my couch until sunrise, too afraid to sleep. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went straight to the sporting goods store. I bought the most expensive treadmill they had and paid extra to have it delivered that same day. I've been using it every evening at 8:47 p.m. for the past 3 weeks. 32 minutes of walking, just like always, but now I never leave my house. I tell myself it's better exercise anyway, more control over the incline and speed, better for my knees. I don't tell myself the real reason, that sometimes when I'm walking nowhere on my treadmill, I still smell that sweet, rotting scent. But that's impossible. My treadmill faces away from the windows, so I never have to look at Petunia Lane while I walk. I never want to see how long it is at night.